I wanna be a billionaire so fucking bad.
Billionaire Michael Bloomberg has bought his way onto the Democratic debate stage, and he is now second in the polls behind Bernie Sanders at 19%. And truth be told, in the Nevada debate, he got destroyed. Yet until now, he has been the only candidate who has not received serious media or debate scrutiny. So this video is going to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of who Michael Bloomberg is. What is his history in politics? Where does he stand on the issues? And does he have the capacity to beat Donald Trump? Let's find out the truth about Michael Bloomberg. So to start off with, Michael Bloomberg's record in politics. From 2001 till 2013, Michael Bloomberg was mayor of New York. And I'm sure most of you have heard of his controversial stop and frisk policy. So stop and frisk is essentially when the police think you look suspicious and they stop you without a warrant.
Please put your hands up against the wall.
And search you for weapons and drugs. And here's what Michael Bloomberg had to say about it.
95% of your murderers and murder victims fit one MO. You can just take the description, Xerox it, and pass it out to all the cops. They are male, minorities, 15 to 25. That's true in New York, it's true in virtually every city. That's true. Why? Because we put all the cops in the minority neighborhoods. Yes, that's true. Why we do it? Because that's where all the crime is. And the way you get the guns out of the kids' hands is to throw them against the wall and frisk them.
And then banging my head into this.
I think we disproportionately stop whites too much and minorities too little.
Yes, you heard that right. Michael Bloomberg spearheaded a racist policy of stopping and searching mostly black and Hispanic men. And he specifically directed the police to operate mostly in minority neighborhoods. Now wait a second. Some of you might be saying, don't blacks commit a disproportionate share of crime? So wouldn't it make sense that the police search more in black neighborhoods? And it's true that in America, black Americans commit more crime compared to their population. FBI statistics showed that 27.4% of arrests were of black Americans, even though blacks are just 12% of the population. Black Americans, of course, also have 10 times less household wealth compared to white Americans on average. And we know that poor socioeconomic circumstances breed crime. This, of course, misses the point. Bloomberg said it himself. He deliberately put more police in minority neighborhoods. Do you see the problem? You see, even though it's true that crime is higher in poor black and Hispanic neighborhoods, if you only look for crime in black and Hispanic neighborhoods, guess what? The following year, you will find that a higher percentage of crime was done by blacks and Hispanics. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you only look for crime among blacks, you will only find crime among blacks. And you can see this with marijuana arrest rates. Blacks and whites in New York smoke marijuana at about the same rate, yet blacks get arrested for smoking marijuana 8 times more than whites. And this is because of policies like stop and frisk that target blacks more. Okay, but now you might be saying, even if blacks and Hispanics are stopped disproportionately, at least stop and frisk reduced crime, right? Well, no, not really. You see, although overall crime went down under Bloomberg's 12 years as mayor, stop and frisk had nothing to do with it. Look at this graph. Violent crime and property crime has been going down since before Bloomberg massively increased stop and frisk. And as you can see, increasing stop and frisk had no relationship to the reduction in crime. And look at this second graph. The yellow line shows the number of stop and frisks, which increased massively under Bloomberg, while the orange line represents the number of stops that resulted in further action. And again, you can see there is no relationship. What's more, 89% of stops were done on innocent people, and no weapons were found in 93.5% of stops. So in other words, stop and frisk only inflates the crime statistics of minorities, it doesn't actually reduce crime, and most of the people stopped are innocent. So essentially, stop and frisk was just an advanced way of harassing millions of young black and Hispanic men. And that's exactly what the courts found. You see, Bloomberg was sued for stop and frisk, and the courts found that it was racist and violated people's constitutional rights to freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. So don't believe what Michael Bloomberg had to say about stop and frisk. He claims that he inherited the policy, which is true, but he also claims that he worked to end it, which is a lie. Stop and frisk increased massively under his administration and only ended in his last year in power after it was ruled unconstitutional. And it's not only stop and frisk that was problematic. Michael Bloomberg stopped a minimum wage increase in New York to $11.50 an hour and said he doesn't believe in the minimum wage.
For example, I'm not in favor, I've never been in favor of raising the minimum wage.
Despite the fact that 2/3 of Americans support a $15 minimum wage. And analysis of all the economic studies on the minimum wage show that most studies found that increasing the minimum wage did not actually increase unemployment. And this is not his only anti-worker stance. In 2014, Michael Bloomberg was sued for refusing to pay his workers overtime, and he was forced by the courts to pay millions in lost overtime to his employees. Michael Bloomberg is running in the Democratic Party, yet he has been a long-time Republican, endorsing George Bush in 2004.
And we are going to bring George W. Bush back for 4 more years. You have my word on that.
Who started an illegal war in Iraq, and he donated to the Republican National Committee as late as 2018, when Trump was already in power. And when it comes to women, Bloomberg's record is horrendous. And I'll let Elizabeth Warren tell you more about that.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg. He has gotten some number of women, dozens, who knows, to sign non-disclosure agreements, both for sexual harassment and for gender discrimination in the workplace. So, Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements so we can hear their side of the story?
And after 9/11, Bloomberg engaged in mass surveillance of innocent Muslims, infiltrating and spying on worshippers in mosques. It's not all bad, though. Bloomberg played a major role in the significant urban renewal of large parts of New York City. He expanded transport infrastructure, crime went down, he tackled environmental issues and improved the education system. Okay, so Bloomberg may have his issues, but how did he even get into the debates or achieve such a prominent status in such a short time? Well, the short answer is money. You see, to get into the Democratic debates, you had to meet several requirements. You had to have a certain percentage of support in the polls, and you had to have a certain number of individual donors. This is to show that you have at least some level of grassroots support to justify being on the debate stage. The problem for Bloomberg is that his campaign was entirely self-funded. He only has one donor, himself, and so he didn't meet the donor requirements. Then in November 2019, he donated over $800,000 to the Democratic Party, and mysteriously, a few weeks later, the debate rules were changed so as not to include the donor requirement, allowing Michael Bloomberg to participate in the debates. It's almost as if they were influenced by the money they received from Bloomberg. And this highlights a major problem. Bloomberg has said that the fact that his campaign is self-funded means that he's not tied to special interests. But when you have $60 billion, you are a special interest. With such obscene amounts of money, one person can influence an entire democracy and drown out the voices of millions. Over 1 million people have donated to Bernie Sanders' campaign. Yet all those donations don't matter when Michael Bloomberg can simply spend $400 million on ads and climb to 19% in the polls simply using his money. Why should the voice of one man count more than the voice of 1 million people in a democracy? What happened to one man, one vote? And this is not the only way that Bloomberg's money is corrupting our democracy. Emily's List, a feminist organization, stopped criticizing Bloomberg despite his horrendous record with women after they received donations from him. And countless Democratic politicians are endorsing Bloomberg after he poured money into their party and into their campaigns. This is a disturbing development. The obscene wealth inequality and corrupt campaign finance system in America are allowing a billionaire to simply buy elections. When you give money to the people who make the laws, you get to make the laws. Okay, but maybe you're thinking, I don't like Bloomberg either, but Trump is worse, and Bloomberg stands the best chance of defeating him. And at face value, that might even seem plausible. There have been polls that show Bloomberg beating Trump nationally, but the latest polls show that Bloomberg loses to Trump. But the polls miss a key point: turnout. You see, most of the people currently supporting Trump are definitely going to vote for him in November. You can't convince these people. The only way to win is to get Democrats and independents to turn out in overwhelming numbers to support the Democratic nominee. And Trump basically highlighted this point by pointing out that he would rather run against Bloomberg than Bernie because Bloomberg has no supporters.
Frankly, I'd rather run against Bloomberg than Bernie Sanders because Sanders has real followers. Whether you like him or not, whether you agree with him or not, I happen to think it's terrible what he says, but he has followers. Bloomberg's just buying his way in.
And in order to do that, you need a candidate who can fire up the Democratic base. Hillary Clinton failed to do this, and that's why she lost. Many people like to talk about the 6 million people who voted for Obama in 2012 and then switched to Trump in 2016. But they forget that 4.4 million people voted for Obama in 2012 and just stayed home in 2016 because Hillary Clinton was such a terrible candidate. You need those 4.4 million people to show up in November to win the election. Do you really think that Bloomberg, with his problems when it comes to race, women, his anti-working class stances, the fact that he's a billionaire Republican, will be able to motivate these people to vote when Hillary Clinton failed to do so in 2016? On top of that, the last debate showed Bloomberg to be a terrible debater. He went down 3 points in the polls after this debate, and his net favorability rating decreased by 20 points. Now that was after a debate against fellow Democrats. Do you really think he could survive against Trump? This notion that we should vote blue no matter who needs to go. The idea that we should vote for whichever person is the Democratic nominee, even if they are a right-wing oligarch who hates the working class, who hates minorities, but at least he's not Trump, hey, is a fallacy. Don't be fooled. Michael Bloomberg is not your savior against Trump. He's a Republican running in a Democratic party. He's a racist running in an anti-racist party. And he's a billionaire running in a party meant to represent the interests of the working class. Such a man will not be able to inspire the people who didn't show up in 2016 to beat Trump. Because he's exactly like Trump, just less rude. When you give people the choice between a racist Republican billionaire and a racist Republican billionaire, people will just stay home. Tell me what you think, guys. Like, share, and subscribe. 'Cause this was my take.